170 million years ago, its warm, clear waters were shared by ichthyosaurs that crossed the sea with astonishing speed, pliosaurs carrying skulls longer than most people are tall, and another hunter that seemed to ignore everything we associate with its family. It was a crocodile, not the kind that waited beside a riverbank or drifted beneath overhanging branches. This one lived so completely at sea that returning to land was no longer possible. Over millions of years, the ocean had rewritten it. Its armor disappeared. The heavy bony plates carried by every living crocodilian vanished, replaced by smooth skin preserved in remarkable Jurassic fossils. Its legs became flippers, its finger bones multiplied, its joints changed shape, and the limbs that once carried its ancestors across land became tools built only for swimming. Its tail grew into a powerful downward facing fluke, preserved not just in bone, but in rare soft tissue fossils that reveal an animal propelled through open water in a way no modern crocodile could match. Some species may even have given birth at sea, making them the only known members of the archosaur family, the same great lineage that includes dinosaurs and birds, to abandon egg laying in favor of bringing live young into the world far from any shoreline. Then came Dacosaurus. Its name means tearing lizard, and it earned it. Short, immensely powerful jaws lined with serrated teeth allowed it to hunt large marine reptiles and sharks, biting through flesh in a way more reminiscent of a modern killer whale than any crocodile alive today. Every feature that defines a crocodile had been transformed. The armor was gone, the riverbanks were gone, even the dependence on land had disappeared. Yet the fossils leave little room for doubt. These animals still belonged to the crocodilian lineage. To understand how these animals became what they were, we need to travel farther into the past, to a world before their transformation, and to the catastrophe that opened the path beneath their feet. The story begins around 201 million years ago, when Earth crossed one of the five greatest extinction events in its history. Entire ecosystems unraveled across both continents and oceans. Around 34% of known marine genera disappeared, while many dominant reptiles and other competitors vanished from landscapes that had once seemed securely occupied. Life rarely leaves an empty stage untouched. As familiar inhabitants faded, opportunities spread through environments that had long been crowded. Coastal waters, shallow seas, and offshore habitats suddenly contained fewer rivals and fewer established hunters. Across the world, several groups of land dwelling vertebrates began exploring these altered shorelines. Some ventured only briefly into the water, others remained longer with each passing generation. Among them were the crocodilomorphs, distant relatives of modern crocodiles, whose appearance would have surprised anyone expecting the broad snouts and heavy river hunters living today. Early Jurassic crocodilomorphs formed an astonishing variety of body shapes. Some were lightly built, carrying narrow frames supported by long legs suited for swift movement across land. Others remained compact, feeding on smaller prey while occupying habitats ranging from forests to coastal margins. Their diversity reflected a family tree still experimenting with possibilities instead of settling into the familiar design recognized in living crocodilians. The future masters of the sea had not yet committed themselves to waves or tides. They still belonged to a world where dry ground remained part of everyday life. The boundary between the Triassic and Jurassic periods became more than a geological marker. It created an opening large enough for evolution to explore entirely new directions. Whenever ecological space appears, living organisms begin adapting to fill it, generation after generation, without intention or planning. The ocean now offered one of the broadest opportunities of the age. Predators, fish, and marine reptiles all responded in different ways, each lineage testing what survival might look like within an altered world. Among these explorers appeared a branch scientists call thalattosuchia, a name drawn from Greek words meaning sea crocodile. They were not true crocodiles in the modern sense. Instead, they belonged to the wider crocodilomorph family, sharing ancestry while following a separate evolutionary route. Fossils suggest this group emerged within roughly 10 million years of the Great Extinction, an unexpectedly brief span in evolutionary history. Such timing hints that the invitation offered by the recovering seas was answered almost as soon as conditions allowed. Across the expanding Tethys Ocean, warm water washed over broad continental shelves broken by scattered islands and winding coastlines. Sunlight reached deep into clear shallows where fish, invertebrates, and marine life multiplied once again. Along these edges, the earliest thalattosuchians stepped into salt water with bodies that still remembered land. Their movements remained cautious, their limbs still capable of supporting them beyond the shoreline, while the sea waited with countless generations of change already beginning to unfold. Along the sheltered margins of the Jurassic coastline, the first thalattosuchians remained creatures balanced between two worlds. Their bodies carried signs of a future that had only begun to unfold, while many features still reflected an ancestry shaped by solid ground. They entered shallow salt water often enough to thrive there, although the shoreline remained a familiar refuge whenever conditions became unfavorable. These early members of the group belonged mainly to the teleosauroids. Their heads stretched into long, slender snouts packed with many small, pointed teeth. Such jaws were poorly suited for crushing large prey, yet they excelled at seizing swift fish before they could dart away. Their eyes faced upward from the top of the skull, allowing them to watch the bright surface, while much of the body stayed submerged. Across their backs lay rows of osteoderms, the bony plates that strengthened the skin and provided protection, much like those carried by living crocodilians today. Their preferred surroundings reflected these adaptations. Coastal lagoons, broad estuaries where fresh and salt water mingled, and sheltered marine inlets offered abundant fish while remaining close to land. These habitats formed natural transition zones where changing tides shaped daily life. Whenever storms disturbed open water or food became scarce offshore, the animals could still retreat toward shallower channels and nearby banks without abandoning the sea altogether. A living Indian gharial offers one of the closest modern comparisons. Like those surviving reptiles, the teleosauroids specialized in catching fish with narrow jaws instead of overpowering large struggling animals. The resemblance reached beyond appearance alone. Both occupied similar ecological roles, spending much of their lives in water while avoiding long journeys across the open sea. Nearly 180 million years separated them, yet evolution arrived at strikingly similar solutions for pursuing fast moving prey within protected waterways. Among the best known examples was Steniosaurus, represented by fossils recovered across much of Europe. Its skeleton preserves an animal that appears comfortably familiar with an elongated body, armored back, and elongated snout that still resembles a crocodilian at first glance. Closer examination reveals subtle shifts already underway. Limb proportions suggest increasing confidence in the water, while the skull reflects growing refinement toward efficient fish hunting. Each fossil captures a stage of transition instead of a finished destination. Daily life probably revolved around patience more than pursuit. A teleosauroid could remain partly submerged until fish drifted within reach, then strike with impressive speed before swallowing its catch whole. Smaller marine reptiles may occasionally have become prey as well, although fish almost certainly formed the foundation of the diet. This feeding strategy demanded precision instead of overwhelming force, allowing these reptiles to prosper without competing directly against the largest marine hunters, already occupying deeper waters. For millions of years, this way of life proved successful. The teleosauroids had found a dependable balance between land and sea, protected by armor, sustained by rich coastal ecosystems, and shaped by an environment that rewarded specialization without demanding complete transformation. Their story demonstrates that evolution had already produced an effective design, even before another branch of the family began drifting farther from shore, following currents that would eventually erase nearly every trace of their terrestrial beginnings. Evolution rarely follows a single path for long. As generations accumulated through the early and middle Jurassic, the thalattosuchian family separated into two distinct branches. The division was gradual, almost impossible to notice within the span of a single lifetime, yet across millions of years, it reshaped an entire lineage. One branch became known as the Teleosauroidea, the other became the Metriorhynchoidea. Both shared the same distant ancestors, although each began responding to the sea in a very different way. The teleosauroids remained closely tied to coastlines that had already proven dependable. Their bodies continued to suit life among estuaries, lagoons, and shallow marine channels where fish were plentiful and land was never far away. This strategy brought remarkable success. Fossils discovered across Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America reveal an adaptable group occupying many coastal environments while retaining the familiar armored body inherited from earlier crocodilomorphs. They diversified into numerous forms without abandoning the boundary where land and sea continually met. Farther from shore, another experiment was unfolding. The metriorhynchoids gradually extended their range beyond sheltered waters, entering broader stretches of the Tethys Ocean where coastlines faded into the distance. Every generation that spent more time offshore encountered different demands: stronger currents, longer journeys, and prey moving through open water rewarded traits unlike those favored near beaches and river mouths. The sea began applying its own pressures, reshaping anatomy in ways that no terrestrial habitat ever required. Nothing about this divergence resembled a deliberate choice. Individual animals followed food, favorable conditions, and opportunities for survival. Small differences between neighboring populations accumulated until they no longer resembled slight variations within the same design. A gentle, evolutionary slope eventually widened into a profound separation. Descendants that remained near the coast continued refining a semi aquatic existence, while those pressing into deeper water drifted toward an entirely different body plan. Shared ancestry remained written within their bones, although their futures no longer pointed in the same direction. Competition helped shape this divide. Coastal ecosystems already supported many efficient predators. Teleosauroids hunted there in growing numbers. Ichthyosaurs had established themselves long before, moving swiftly through nearby waters, while plesiosaurs expanded into overlapping habitats with specialized feeding techniques of their own. Every successful hunter reduced the opportunities available to another. Beyond the crowded shallows, the open sea presented greater risks, although it also contained ecological space waiting to be occupied by animals capable of adapting to its demands. History preserved an unexpected irony within these parallel stories. The teleosauroids, whose strategy appeared dependable and conservative, survived for tens of millions of years before disappearing during the early Cretaceous. They produced no living descendants. The metriorhynchoids, whose bodies would eventually become almost unrecognizable beside their land dwelling relatives, also vanished before the age of modern crocodilians. Neither evolutionary pathway endured forever. One, however, transformed its descendants into creatures unlike any crocodile before or since. As coastlines slipped farther behind them, the meteor hyncoids entered waters where familiar solutions gradually lost their value. Every journey away from land carried them deeper into an environment that rewarded lighter bodies, greater efficiency, and increasing commitment to life at sea. Within those expanding horizons, the next stage of their transformation had already begun. The earliest signs of permanent change did not appear in the jaws or the tail. They began within the skin itself. Across countless generations, one feature that had defined crocodilomorphs since their earliest history started to disappear. The rigid covering that once protected their bodies gradually faded away until nothing comparable remained. This was the first unmistakable signal that one branch of the family had begun adapting to a world unlike any their ancestors had known. Those protective structures are called osteoderms. They are bony plates embedded within the skin, arranged like overlapping shields along the back and sometimes across other parts of the body. Living crocodilians still carry them today. Besides providing defense against bites and impacts, osteoderms help regulate body temperature by storing and releasing heat gathered while resting on land. They are part of the familiar crocodilian design, so deeply rooted that losing them represented one of the boldest anatomical shifts the lineage would ever experience. The open ocean rewarded a different kind of body. Every unnecessary layer of bone increased weight while adding resistance against water flowing past the animal. A heavy exterior demanded more energy during every stroke of the tail and every adjustment through the sea. Natural selection steadily favored individuals carrying lighter frames that moved with greater efficiency. Small reductions accumulated over immense spans of time until the armor that had once offered security became an expensive burden. This pattern appears repeatedly across marine life. Dolphins possess smooth skin that allows water to slip across their bodies with minimal resistance. Sharks rely on streamlined surfaces that reduce drag while preserving speed. Fast-swimming predators from entirely separate branches of the tree of life often converge upon similar external forms because the physical properties of water remain constant regardless of ancestry. The meteorhynchids entered that same conversation with the sea, surrendering protection in exchange for effortless movement. Fossils preserve this transformation with unusual clarity. Rare specimens retaining impressions of soft tissue reveal skin that lacked the armored covering expected in crocodilian relatives. Instead of rows of bony scutes, the surface appears smooth and uniform. Such discoveries are especially valuable because skin almost never survives the fossilization process. Fine-grained limestone captured details that bone alone could never reveal, confirming that this was not an educated guess drawn from skeletons, but a direct record of the animal's exterior. Abandoning armor also changed the ecological balance surrounding these reptiles. Their ancestors could rely upon thick, protective plates when confronted by rivals or larger predators. Metriorhynchids surrendered that advantage. Survival increasingly depended upon reaching prey first, escaping danger efficiently, and maintaining steady movement through open water. Speed and maneuverability became essential companions because the old defensive strategy had disappeared with the armor itself. The consequences reached beyond swimming performance. Modern crocodilians depend upon osteoderms as part of the complex relationship between body temperature and life on land, spending long periods absorbing warmth from the sun before returning to the water. A smooth-skinned metriorhynchid lacked that familiar system. Crawling onto beaches became less practical, while prolonged life ashore grew increasingly incompatible with its changing anatomy. By relinquishing the armor that had accompanied its lineage for millions of years, this marine crocodile crossed a threshold from which there was no gradual return. The sea had become its permanent home. Once the protective armor disappeared, another part of the body began following the same irreversible direction. The limbs, once capable of supporting weight on solid ground, gradually surrendered their original purpose. Bone by bone, joint by joint, they became instruments shaped for movement through water alone. This transformation reached far beyond appearance. It altered how these reptiles traveled, hunted, rested, and eventually how they completed every stage of life. The forelimbs experienced the greatest remodeling. The upper arm bones became shorter and broader, reducing unnecessary leverage that had once supported walking. Wrist bones fused into more rigid structures, sacrificing flexibility in favor of strength and stability during swimming. The fingers stretched into elongated paddles, unlike those of any living crocodilian. Some metriorhynchid species developed more than 10 finger bones within a single digit. This condition is known as hyperphalangy, the evolutionary addition of extra finger bones that expands the surface area of a flipper without greatly increasing its weight. Hyperphalangy did not originate within this lineage alone. Ichthyosaurs evolved it independently. Plesiosaurs arrived at the same solution through their own history, and sea turtles display a related pattern in their enlarged flippers. None of these animals shared a recent common marine ancestor, yet each encountered similar physical demands after entering the sea. Water repeatedly favored broad, paddle-shaped limbs capable of precise control, demonstrating how unrelated groups can converge upon nearly identical engineering when responding to the same environment. The hind limbs followed a different path. They remained attached to the body, although they became noticeably smaller as millions of years passed. Unlike ichthyosaurs, which reduced their hind limbs even further, metriorhynchids retained these rear appendages as modest structures that contributed little to propulsion. Their reduced size suggests they had become biologically vestigial, preserved more as evolutionary remnants than as active tools for swimming through open water. Careful biomechanical studies provide further insight into their function. The broad foreflippers probably generated very little forward thrust. Instead, they behaved much like hydrofoils, creating stability while allowing controlled turns, changes in depth, and rapid adjustments during pursuit. Forward movement came primarily from the tail, while the flippers guided the animal with precision through a three-dimensional environment where movement occurred in every direction. Such control would have been especially valuable while tracking agile prey or navigating among other large marine reptiles. The skeleton also changed where the hind limbs connected to the body. The pelvic girdle expanded, creating a wider opening through the hips than earlier relatives possessed. Similar modifications appear in other reptiles that spent their entire lives in the sea and reproduced without returning to land. Although direct fossil evidence of embryos has not been discovered for metriorhynchids, this anatomical shift suggests that the body was gradually accommodating a life cycle no longer tied to beaches or riverbanks. Taken together, these changes reveal an animal that had crossed another permanent boundary. Legs capable of carrying weight across mud or sand had become flippers suited only for water. A body built in this way could not walk with confidence, crawl across a shoreline, or lift itself onto dry ground without great difficulty. If a meteorrhynchid ever reached land, it would have found itself stranded within an anatomy perfected for the sea and for nowhere else. At the rear of the body, the final stage of this remarkable transformation took shape. Earlier changes had reduced weight and reshaped the limbs, yet true mastery of the open sea required something even more important. The meteorrhynchid tail gradually became the primary engine driving the animal through water, replacing the broad, full body movements still used by its distant relatives. This single feature completed the transition from coastal reptile to dedicated marine predator. The skeleton records this change with unusual clarity. Toward the end of the tail, the vertebrae curved downward instead of continuing in a straight line. That bend supported a fleshy extension projecting below the tail, forming what paleontologists call a hypocercal fluke. Sharks possess a different arrangement, known as a heterocercal tail, where the upper portion extends farther than the lower one. Metriorhynchids evolved the opposite configuration. Their main propulsive surface occupied the lower side, producing forward thrust through powerful side-to-side movement. This design supported a swimming style called carangiform locomotion. Instead of flexing the entire body in broad waves, much of the torso remained comparatively stable, while the rear section and tail swept through wide arcs. The result was efficient cruising over long distances with less wasted energy. Many modern tuna rely upon a similar pattern, as do several fast-swimming sharks. Evolution repeatedly discovered that concentrating movement near the tail allowed predators to travel farther while preserving strength for bursts of acceleration. Modern crocodilians reveal how dramatic this change truly became. Living species swim by bending nearly their entire bodies from side to side, producing steady but comparatively slow motion through rivers and wetlands. Their tails provide propulsion, although much of the body participates in every stroke. Metriorhynchids shifted toward a different mechanical system. The more rigid torso reduced drag, allowing the tail alone to generate most of the driving force. No crocodilian alive today approaches the sustained speed this arrangement likely produced. Comparable structures appear again and again among unrelated marine animals. Ichthyosaurs developed tail flukes through their own evolutionary pathway. Sharks refined a different version suited to their anatomy. Whales and dolphins eventually evolved broad horizontal flukes that move up and down instead of side to side. Although these groups descended from entirely different ancestors, each encountered the same physical challenge of moving efficiently through open water. Their solutions differed in detail, while the underlying principle remained strikingly consistent. Evidence for the meteorrhynchid fluke extends beyond the bones themselves. Rare fossils, preserved within exceptionally fine limestone, retain impressions of soft tissue surrounding the tail. These deposits, including those associated with the famous Solnhofen limestone, captured outlines delicate enough to reveal the shape of the fleshy, propulsive lobe. Such preservation is extraordinarily uncommon, offering direct confirmation that the fluke existed instead of leaving scientists to reconstruct it solely from skeletal anatomy. A tail built in this manner transformed far more than swimming ability. Greater speed expanded hunting opportunities, allowing pursuit across wider stretches of ocean instead of relying upon brief ambushes near shore. Long chases became practical, rapid changes in direction became easier, and agile prey became increasingly vulnerable. Every sweep of the fluke reflected millions of years of refinement, producing an animal whose entire body had become organized around movement through open water, where endurance and acceleration together define the life of a successful predator. The most profound changes left almost no mark on the animal's outline. They unfolded within the skull, the bloodstream, and the chemistry that kept every organ functioning beneath the surface. A streamlined body and powerful tail could carry a reptile across the sea, yet neither would matter if the surrounding water slowly poisoned it. Before the ocean could become a permanent home, the body first needed a way to survive the salt itself. For most land vertebrates, seawater presents a constant physiological challenge. Every mouthful introduces large amounts of sodium into the body. Kidneys alone cannot remove that salt quickly enough, allowing concentrations to rise until normal cellular function begins to fail. Freshwater reptiles avoid this danger by living where salt levels remain low. An animal spending its entire life in the open sea cannot depend upon that option. It requires a different solution built directly into its biology. Modern reptiles demonstrate several approaches to this problem. Living crocodilians usually inhabit freshwater rivers, lakes, and wetlands, even though some species can tolerate brackish environments for limited periods. Sea turtles possess specialized salt glands positioned near their eyes. The familiar appearance of tears flowing down the face of a nesting turtle is actually concentrated salt leaving the body. Marine iguanas rely upon glands connected to their nasal passages, forcefully expelling excess salt through repeated sneezes. Each lineage solved the same challenge with its own anatomical design. Metriorhynchids developed an especially effective system. Deep within the skull, enlarged nasal salt glands filtered sodium from the bloodstream before it reached harmful levels. The concentrated solution was then expelled through passages connected to the snout. Fossilized bones preserve indirect evidence for these organs because soft tissues rarely survive through geological time. Enlarged cavities inside the skull correspond precisely with the locations expected for substantial salt glands, providing strong anatomical support for their presence. Modern imaging techniques have expanded this picture even further. Computed tomography scanning allows paleontologists to examine the internal architecture of fossil skulls without damaging the specimens themselves. These scans reveal spacious chambers far larger than those found in earlier thalattosuchians that remained closer to shore. Their size suggests glands operating almost continuously as seawater entered the body through food, accidental swallowing, and daily life within a marine environment. The skull had become an active component of salt regulation instead of serving only as protection for the brain and sensory organs. This adaptation also imposed limits. Recent research indicates that the enlarged sinuses associated with draining the salt glands occupied valuable space within the snout. Marine mammals evolved different anatomical arrangements that supported extremely deep diving. Metriorhynchids appear to have retained large sinus systems because efficient salt removal remained essential. The same feature that granted freedom from freshwater habitats may also have restricted how deeply these reptiles could descend beneath the surface. Every adaptation carried its own balance of advantages and constraints. One early member of the broader thalattosuchian lineage, Pelagosaurus, provides an especially revealing clue. Although its body still retained many characteristics of less specialized relatives, its skull already shows evidence of enlarged nasal chambers, interpreted as the beginnings of advanced salt glands. This discovery suggests that physiological innovation preceded many of the dramatic external changes described in later species. Long before flippers reached their final form or the tail became a powerful marine engine, the body had already begun preparing itself internally for a life surrounded by salt water, changing from the inside outward with remarkable precision. Reproduction remained the final test of whether these reptiles truly belonged to the sea. Swimming efficiently, hunting successfully, and regulating salt solved only part of the challenge. If every generation still depended upon returning to land to lay eggs, their independence would always remain incomplete. Evidence preserved within the skeleton suggests the metriorhynchids may have crossed that final boundary as well, replacing an ancient reproductive pattern with one suited entirely to life offshore. The strongest clue lies within the pelvic girdle. In reptiles that spend their entire lives in water and give birth to living young, the hips often display a widened opening that allows offspring to pass safely through the birth canal. This feature appears repeatedly among fully marine lineages. Metriorhynchid fossils reveal a similar enlargement, suggesting their bodies had begun accommodating birth in water instead of egg laying on beaches or riverbanks. Although bones cannot preserve the complete process, they preserve the framework that made such a process possible. Other marine reptiles provide an important comparison. Several ichthyosaur fossils have been discovered with embryos preserved inside the mother's body, leaving no uncertainty that they gave birth to fully formed young while remaining at sea. Some specimens even capture the moment of birth itself, frozen within stone for more than 150 million years. Comparable fossils have not yet been discovered for metriorhynchids. Even so, the similarities in pelvic anatomy strongly support the same biological direction, making live birth the most persuasive interpretation available from the evidence. If that conclusion is correct, the ecological consequences become extraordinary. Courtship, fertilization, gestation, birth, and early growth could all occur without a single journey onto land. Every stage of life would unfold within the marine environment. Juveniles would enter the water immediately, surrounded by the same habitat that sustained the adults. The dependence that still bound modern crocodilians to riverbanks and nesting sites would have disappeared completely from this branch of the family tree. Modern marine mammals demonstrate how successful such a strategy can become. Dolphins and whales give birth while floating in open water, nursing and raising their young without ever returning to land. Metriorhynchids almost certainly did not produce milk or care for offspring in the same manner, yet the broader pattern remains strikingly similar. They appear to have solved the problem of reproduction within the sea roughly 150 million years before the earliest whales began their own transition from land to ocean. Among the broader archosaur lineage, this possibility carries exceptional significance. Dinosaurs reproduced by laying eggs. Birds continue that tradition today. Living crocodilians construct nests along the edges of rivers, lakes, and wetlands before carefully guarding their clutches. If the interpretation of metriorhynchid anatomy proves correct, these marine reptiles became the only known archosaurs to abandon egg laying altogether in favor of bearing living young. Such a departure would stand alone within one of the largest vertebrate lineages Earth has ever produced. The implications extend beyond reproduction itself. A lineage that no longer required nesting beaches had completed another irreversible step away from its terrestrial ancestry. The next generation began life surrounded by seawater from its very first breath, inheriting a world that existed entirely beyond the shoreline. By reshaping even the beginning of life, evolution carried the metriorhynchids into a condition where the ocean no longer served as a destination. It had become the only home they would ever know. The world awaiting these transformed reptiles stretched far beyond any shoreline they had once known. It was an ocean shaped by continents still drifting apart, where coastlines curved through warm seas and countless islands rose from broad continental shelves. Every adaptation carried into this realm would be tested against an ecosystem that had already spent millions of years refining its own balance. The Tethys Ocean occupied much of the tropical belt during the Jurassic period, extending across regions that would one day become Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia. The great supercontinent Pangaea was breaking apart, opening fresh marine passages that allowed water to circulate between expanding basins. Land that appears continuous on modern maps existed instead as scattered island chains separated by shallow channels, lagoons, and broad continental seas. Those changing coastlines created opportunities for marine life to spread, diversify, and occupy habitats unavailable in earlier ages. Conditions within these waters encouraged extraordinary biological richness. Surface temperatures remained warmer than those of most oceans today, while abundant sunlight fueled immense populations of microscopic plankton. Those tiny drifting organisms supported dense schools of fish, numerous ammonites with their coiled shells, swift squid, and an astonishing variety of marine invertebrates. Energy flowed through every level of the food web, sustaining predators of many different sizes. The sea had become one of the most productive environments the planet had yet assembled. Many remarkable hunters had already established themselves there. Ichthyosaurs had spent more than 50 million years adapting to marine life and possessed streamlined bodies suited for sustained swimming across great distances. Plesiosaurs traveled using four powerful flippers, with some species carrying remarkably elongated necks that allowed them to approach prey from unexpected angles. Enormous pliosaurs occupied the highest levels of the food web, with certain species reaching more than 10 meters, which is about 33 feet. In length, their immense jaws and muscular bodies made them dominant predators within many marine habitats. Into this populated ocean came the thalattosuchians. They did not arrive as rulers entering an empty kingdom. Every major ecological role already supported experienced occupants refined by long evolutionary histories. Fast pursuit hunters existed. Large ambush predators existed. Specialists feeding upon hard-shelled prey also had their place. Competition surrounded every source of food, every hunting ground, and every favorable stretch of open water. Such crowded ecosystems did not reward generalists for very long. Paleontological research indicates that Jurassic marine communities displayed extensive niche partitioning, with predators separating themselves according to preferred prey, swimming depth, feeding technique, and daily behavior. Even species sharing the same waters often avoided direct competition by exploiting different ecological opportunities. Diversity persisted because each hunter occupied a distinct role instead of overlapping completely with its neighbors. The meteorrhynchids entered this intricate web through specialization rather than overwhelming strength. Their reshaped bodies, efficient swimming, advanced salt regulation, and probable live birth allowed them to exploit opportunities unavailable to less completely marine crocodilian relatives. Evolution had not fashioned them into copies of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, or pliosaurs. It had produced another solution to the demands of the open sea, one carefully fitted into an ecosystem already filled with exceptional predators. Within that living mosaic, precision proved every bit as valuable as power, and the descendants of shoreline crocodiles found a place by becoming masters of a role uniquely their own. A family tree can sometimes appear uniform from a distance, only revealing its richness when each branch is examined on its own. That was the story of the meteorrhynchids. Their shared ancestry gave them the same broad marine foundation, yet evolution refined that foundation into several distinct forms, each fitted to a different way of living in the Jurassic Sea. Among the best known were the long-snouted hunters, including the genus Metriorhynchus. Their jaws stretched forward in graceful proportions and carried numerous slender teeth that interlocked like the bars of a delicate cage. Those teeth were not designed to crack shells or tear apart massive prey. They excelled at seizing swift fish before they could twist away. The narrow snout sliced cleanly through water, reducing resistance during rapid sideways strikes. Every feature reflected speed, precision, and efficiency. Their mouths functioned less as crushing weapons than as carefully shaped traps that closed around agile prey in a fraction of a moment. Another branch followed an even more specialized path. The genus Crocodile possessed finer jaws, lighter teeth, and a more delicate skull than many of its relatives. Fossil evidence suggests that soft bodied cephalopods formed an important part of its diet. Squid, belemnites, and ammonites drifted or darted through the warm seas in immense numbers, providing abundant food for a hunter built for quick captures instead of violent struggles. Studies of fossil skulls from this genus also reveal especially prominent spaces associated with enlarged nasal salt glands, reinforcing the picture of an animal thoroughly adapted to spending its entire life surrounded by seawater. Other members of the family departed dramatically from these graceful designs. The geosaurians evolved shorter, deeper snouts equipped with large teeth bearing sharp serrated edges. Those teeth resembled cutting blades, more than slender needles, capable of slicing through flesh and gripping struggling victims. Their skulls grew more heavily built, allowing stronger bite forces suited to tackling substantial prey. Fish alone could not explain such formidable equipment. These predators occupied a different ecological role, hunting marine reptiles and other sizable animals that shared their waters. They represented one of the highest predatory levels reached by any marine crocodilian relative. This variety reveals an important truth about the metriorhynchids. They were never a single ecological experiment repeated across different coastlines. They became an evolutionary radiation, a collection of closely related species that divided available resources among themselves instead of competing for exactly the same meals. One lineage specialized in rapid fish capture, another favored soft bodied cephalopods. Others developed into formidable macropredators capable of confronting prey approaching their own size. Modern oceans display a remarkably similar pattern among whales and dolphins. Many dolphins pursue schools of fish with speed and coordination. Sperm whales descend into deep water in search of squid. Orcas hunt marine mammals and large vertebrate prey. Those mammals belong to separate branches within one broader lineage, each occupying a distinct ecological role. The metriorhynchids achieved a comparable spread long before whales appeared, using reptilian bodies reshaped by entirely different evolutionary pathways. Late Jurassic marine ecosystems across what is now Europe sometimes supported more than one geosaurian genus at the same time. Fossil assemblages indicate food webs rich enough to sustain both dominant predators and slightly smaller hunters occupying neighboring positions within the same environment. Such complexity reflects seas abundant enough to support several layers of large predation, where specialization allowed closely related animals to flourish beside one another instead of forcing a single design to meet every challenge. Among all the metriorhynchids that entered the Jurassic seas, one lineage traveled farther than the rest along the path of specialization. Its appearance no longer hinted at the narrow, snouted fish hunters from which it ultimately descended. Every major feature of its skull announced a different purpose, one centered on overpowering large prey instead of merely catching it. This was Docosaurus, perhaps the most dramatic expression of what a fully marine crocodilian relative could become. Its name reveals much about the impression it left upon paleontologists. Dacosaurus means tearing lizard, derived from the Greek word dakos, meaning to tear. The choice was inspired by its remarkable teeth, and those teeth remain among the clearest clues to its ecology. Even before the rest of the skeleton is examined, they suggest an animal adapted to slicing flesh rather than gripping slippery fish. Most metriorhynchids carried elongated snouts that minimized resistance while pursuing swift prey. Dacosaurus abandoned that design. Its skull became short, broad, and heavily reinforced, producing what paleontologists describe as a brevirostrine condition. The jaws deepened substantially, creating room for enlarged jaw muscles capable of generating exceptional force. Biomechanical analyses of fossil skulls consistently indicate that Dacosaurus possessed the most powerful bite of any known metriorhynchid. Its head no longer resembled that of a modern crocodile wading beside a riverbank. It had become a compact cutting instrument shaped for violent encounters in open water. The teeth completed that transformation. Each tooth was laterally compressed, with finely serrated cutting edges lined by true denticles. Paleontologists describe this arrangement as macrozyphodont dentition. Such teeth function like sharpened blades, penetrating deeply before drawing backward to slice through muscle and connective tissue. They are poorly suited to catching small fish intact, yet remarkably effective for removing substantial pieces from large prey. Every aspect of the feeding apparatus points toward repeated attacks against animals capable of resisting with considerable strength. Although impressive, Dacosaurus maximus was not the largest predator inhabiting Jurassic seas. Adults reached approximately 4.5 meters, which is about 14.8 feet in length. Even so, they ranked among the most formidable marine reptiles of their ecological community. A fossil tooth measuring 5.5 centimeters, which is about 2.2 inches, discovered in Dorset, England, remains the largest known Dacosaurus tooth recovered from the United Kingdom, offering another glimpse of the formidable bite carried within those compact jaws. Its feeding habits are illuminated by unusually direct evidence. One fossil specimen preserves the remains of a cartilaginous fish within the abdominal cavity, demonstrating that sharks formed part of its diet. This discovery confirms that Dacosaurus hunted substantial vertebrate prey instead of relying exclusively upon smaller marine animals. Its likely strategy involved sustained pursuit, a decisive bite, and repeated tearing motions until the victim weakened enough to consume. The closest modern ecological comparison is the killer whale. Orcas possess shortened, immensely powerful jaws capable of subduing prey equal to or larger than themselves. They rely on strength, precision, and repeated attacks rather than delicate capture. Dacosaurus occupied a strikingly similar role during the late Jurassic, around 152 million years ago. The resemblance emerged independently through evolution, demonstrating once again that when oceans reward a particular hunting strategy, distant lineages often arrive at remarkably similar solutions. A coastline can give the illusion that a story belongs to one place. Fossils resting in a famous limestone quarry or displayed in a familiar museum often become the face of an entire lineage. The thalattosuchians invite that impression because some of their finest remains come from Europe. Their history, however, stretched far beyond those celebrated shores. They became travelers of the Jurassic seas, following warm currents across a world whose continents were steadily drifting apart. Europe preserves the richest record. The rocks of what are now the United Kingdom France, and Germany have yielded beautifully preserved skeletons, revealing nearly every stage of their transformation into marine reptiles. Those discoveries formed the foundation of modern understanding, yet they represent only one chapter. Fossils belonging to related forms have emerged from many distant regions, each extending the map farther than once imagined. South America produced Dacosaurus andiniensis in Argentina. North America contributed remains from Oregon. Africa preserved the enormous Machimosaurus in Tunisia. Asia has yielded thalattosuchian fossils from Thailand and China, including freshwater relatives that retained closer ties to earlier lifestyles. Viewed together, these discoveries reveal an extraordinary pattern. During the Jurassic period, the great supercontinent Pangaea was fragmenting into separate landmasses. As continental plates drifted apart, new seaways formed between them, linking coastlines that had once been joined. Warm marine corridors spread across broad regions, creating routes that favored animals already adapted to life in open water. The thalattosuchians expanded through these developing oceans, dispersing across habitats that would eventually become separated by the Atlantic Ocean many millions of years later. Their distribution was not random. Reconstructions based upon paleolatitude consistently place meteorhinkid fossils within tropical and subtropical belts. Such clustering fits well with the biology of reptiles that depended heavily upon environmental warmth. Unlike warm-blooded marine mammals, they probably relied upon surrounding water temperatures to help maintain the conditions necessary for normal activity. Warm seas supported active hunting, efficient digestion, and successful reproduction, making these latitudes especially favorable throughout much of their evolutionary history. That preference also reveals where their expansion ended. Fossils recovered from European Russia represent the northernmost confirmed occurrences of meteorhinkids. They demonstrate that these reptiles reached impressive geographic ranges while still encountering environmental boundaries. Cooler waters farther north appear to have limited continued expansion, drawing an invisible frontier across Jurassic oceans. The edge of their empire was established not by mountains or deserts, but by temperature itself. Far to the south, another thriving marine realm developed along the margin of ancient Argentina. During the late Jurassic, broad epicontinental seas covered parts of the region, creating warm, productive habitats filled with fish, cephalopods, and other marine life. There, Dacosaurus andiniensis occupied the position of apex predator, showing that similar ecological roles evolved across separate ocean basins. Comparable food webs supported comparable hunters despite the immense distances between them. Measured across time, the achievement becomes even more striking. Thalattosuchians endured from approximately 190 million years ago until around 125 million years ago. For roughly 65 million years, they remained established inhabitants of the world's warmer seas, building an oceanic dynasty whose reach extended across continents long before humanity would ever imagine the shape of the globe. A thriving sea is measured not by the presence of one formidable hunter, but by how many can live side by side without exhausting the world that feeds them. The Jurassic oceans reached that balance through remarkable specialization. Countless lives drifted, darted, and hunted through the same waters, while each major predator followed a path shaped by its own anatomy. The thalattosuchians became one thread in this intricate tapestry, sharing the sea with rivals that had arrived by entirely different evolutionary journeys. Three great groups dominated these marine ecosystems: ichthyosaurs had already perfected streamlined bodies that resembled modern dolphins through convergent evolution. Their large eyes, narrow profiles, and powerful tails suited rapid travel across open water. Plesiosaurs carried broad bodies propelled by four wing-like flippers, while many long-necked species explored the water column with graceful precision. Thalattosuchians completed the trio, descending from crocodile relatives that reshaped themselves into marine specialists while retaining unmistakable traces of their ancestry beneath the transformed exterior. Such abundance could only persist because these predators divided the environment instead of competing for every meal. Research comparing skull proportions, jaw mechanics, and tooth structure has revealed distinct feeding strategies among them. Bone strength, muscle attachment, and tooth shape all point toward different prey preferences and hunting behaviors. Each lineage exploited resources that matched its own design, reducing direct conflict while allowing many large carnivores to flourish within the same broad ecosystem. The ichthyosaurs occupied a different realm from most thalattosuchians. Evidence from their anatomy suggests many species were capable of deeper dives, aided by adaptations associated with elevated metabolic rates similar to warm-blooded animals. Their streamlined bodies remained efficient across long underwater pursuits where cooler temperatures prevailed. Thalattosuchians, by contrast, were almost certainly ectothermic reptiles, depending upon warmer surrounding waters to maintain active performance. Their hunting, therefore, concentrated nearer the surface and within sunlit layers, separating them vertically from many of their swift neighbors, even when both pursued fish and cephalopods. Long-necked plesiosaurs introduced another solution to the same challenge. Their extended necks allowed the relatively compact body to remain at a distance while the head approached prey from unexpected directions. Four powerful flippers provided remarkable maneuverability, making abrupt turns possible without relying upon the sweeping tail motions used by thalattosuchians. Similar prey might occasionally appear before both hunters, yet the methods used to capture it differed enough that sustained competition remained surprisingly limited. Still larger figures patrolled portions of these seas. The pliosaurs, short-necked relatives of plesiosaurs, carried immense skulls armed with crushing jaws capable of overwhelming sizable animals. Many occupied deeper offshore habitats where their massive frames proved advantageous. Thalattosuchians, such as Dacosaurus, represented powerful predators within warmer, shallower settings, creating neighboring ecological roles instead of identical ones. Their territories and prey could overlap at times, although each lineage remained shaped by its own physical strengths. The Jurassic Ocean therefore functioned as a layered community of hunters. Feeding grounds differed with depth, body form, swimming style, and preferred prey. Tooth-marked bones and damaged skeletons reveal that encounters between predators sometimes ended violently, reminding us that competition never disappeared entirely. Yet specialization kept these immense reptiles from collapsing into constant conflict. For millions of years, each lineage occupied its own portion of the living sea, maintaining a balance that endured until changing worlds gradually unraveled it. For generations, fossil bones offered only their outer surfaces, inviting careful observation while concealing the structures that once supported living tissue. The arrival of computed tomography transformed that experience. Without cutting into priceless specimens, researchers could peer through layers of stone and bone, revealing details that had remained sealed away since the Jurassic. Skeletons that once appeared complete began telling deeper stories, exposing anatomical changes impossible to recognize from the exterior alone. Computed tomography produces detailed cross sections through fossil skulls and skeletons, allowing scientists to reconstruct internal chambers, narrow canals, and hidden cavities in 3 dimensions. These spaces once contained organs, blood vessels, nerves, and soft tissues that vanished millions of years ago. Although the tissues themselves rarely survived, the surrounding bone preserved their outlines with remarkable fidelity. Through these digital reconstructions, enlarged salt gland chambers, delicate inner ear passages, brain cavities, and networks for circulating blood have all become visible without damaging the fossils themselves. Among the most revealing discoveries are the inner ear structures responsible for balance and orientation. Within the skull lie the semicircular canals, curved passages that detect rotational movement and help an animal understand its position while turning through space. Studies show that the thalattosuchians possessed canals with a distinctive pyramidal arrangement, unlike those of land dwelling crocodile relatives. This configuration appears especially suited to life in 3 dimensional water, where movement occurs upward, downward, forward, and sideways with equal importance. Such adaptations suggest an animal continuously adjusting its posture while pursuing prey through open seas. The brain also records traces of this transition. Computed tomography has produced digital endocasts, natural molds of the cavity that once enclosed the brain. These reconstructions indicate enlargement in cerebral regions associated with integrating sensory information and coordinating movement. At the same time, the areas connected with smell appear comparatively reduced when measured against more terrestrial relatives. In an environment where scent dispersed differently than on land, navigation, vision, and precise spatial awareness became increasingly valuable. The nervous system gradually reflected those changing priorities. Elsewhere within the skull, the scans reveal enlarged nasal chambers that correspond to the locations expected for specialized salt glands. These cavities differ clearly from the cartilaginous nasal capsules seen in less aquatic relatives. Across different species, researchers have noted a striking trend. Animals interpreted as spending more of their lives in open water generally possessed larger spaces dedicated to these glands. The pattern links anatomy directly with ecology, suggesting that increasing dependence upon marine environments required progressively greater capacity to remove excess salt from the bloodstream. The same technology has also deepened understanding of the skeleton itself through microscopic studies of bone tissue. Long bones belonging to metriorhynchids display thinner outer walls surrounding a more porous internal framework, producing an osteoporotic-like structure that reduced overall weight while improving buoyancy. Comparable changes evolved independently in ichthyosaurs, demonstrating how unrelated marine reptiles repeatedly arrived at similar engineering solutions when adapting to the demands of swimming. When these discoveries are assembled, they reveal a transformation documented with unusual clarity. External form, internal anatomy, sensory systems, and bone structure all shifted in measurable ways as thalattosuchians became fully marine predators. Few evolutionary transitions preserve such a continuous record. Each scan adds another layer to the narrative, allowing ancient bones to describe not only what these reptiles looked like, but how they functioned within the sea that reshaped them. Evolution rarely leaves behind a record detailed enough to reveal the order in which changes unfolded. Bones usually preserve the finished result, while the path leading there fades beyond recovery. Among thalattosuchians, however, modern imaging has uncovered something unusually revealing. Deep within their skulls lies evidence that some of the most important adaptations emerged before their outward appearance fully reflected a life at sea. The transformation began where no observer of the Jurassic could ever have seen it. One of the clearest examples comes from Pelagosaurus, an early thalattosuchian that still retained a comparatively primitive body plan. Its limbs had not yet become the efficient paddles seen in later marine specialists. Heavy armor still covered much of the body, and the tail had not developed the powerful fluke that would eventually propel fully pelagic descendants. Yet, computed tomography studies reveal an enlarged nasal cavity consistent with an early salt gland, together with brain structures already departing from those of more terrestrial crocodile relatives. These discoveries suggest that the rebuilding of the animal started with physiology. Processing excess salt was among the first barriers any reptile had to overcome before living permanently in seawater. Without an effective way to remove sodium from the bloodstream, prolonged exposure to the ocean would overwhelm the body's internal balance. Enlarged salt glands offered a solution long before the external silhouette had completed its transition. The chemistry of survival was advancing, while the skeleton still carried many reminders of life closer to shore. The brain followed a similar course. Digital reconstructions indicate reorganized regions associated with spatial processing and sensory integration, changes that would have improved orientation in an environment where movement occurred through open water instead of across solid ground. Such neurological adjustments likely enhanced navigation, balance, and coordinated swimming even before dramatic modifications appeared in the limbs or tail. The nervous system was preparing the animal for an expanding marine existence, while its outward form remained only partway along that evolutionary journey. This sequence carries an important implication. Flippers alone could never solve the challenges presented by seawater. A reptile unable to regulate salt or interpret its surroundings efficiently in an aquatic setting would gain little advantage from stronger swimming structures. Internal physiology, therefore, had to evolve first, or develop alongside external anatomy closely enough that each improvement supported the next. Natural selection rewarded combinations of traits working together, gradually allowing increasingly marine lifestyles to become possible. A comparable pattern appears in the evolutionary history of whales. Their distant land-dwelling ancestors did not acquire broad-tail flukes before their bodies adapted to prolonged marine life. Changes involving salt regulation, kidney function, and heat balance accompanied and in some respects anticipated the external reshaping of the skeleton. Separate evolutionary lineages reached similar conclusions because both encountered the same physical demands imposed by the sea. What makes the thalattosuchian record especially valuable is its ability to preserve this sequence with unusual clarity. Fossils, combined with computed tomography, reveal more than a beginning and an ending. They illuminate stages between them, where anatomy, physiology, and behavior advance together. Evolution emerges as a cascade, instead of a single file of isolated changes, each adaptation reinforcing another, until the accumulated transformation carried these reptiles beyond the shoreline forever. Imagine the ocean through senses shaped not for forests or riverbanks, but for an open sea filled with movement in every direction. Sunlight filtered through warm water and reached broad plains of pale carbonate sediment below, where reefs, shell beds, and drifting life formed an ever-changing landscape. The Jurassic Tethys offered remarkable clarity across many shallow regions. Coiled ammonites turned gently with the currents, belemnites flashed away in brief bursts of speed, and schools of early bony fish shifted together like flowing ribbons suspended in blue water. Within this setting, A meteorhynchid experienced the world differently from its terrestrial ancestors. The sense of smell had become less important than it once was, reflecting a life where scents dispersed slowly and unevenly beneath the surface. Computed tomography studies indicate modifications within the inner ear that enhanced balance and orientation, allowing the animal to judge position while rolling, climbing, or descending through three-dimensional water. Every change helped transform motion into instinct, keeping the body aligned within a fluid environment that never stood still. The surrounding sea also carried information through pressure and vibration. Every swimming fish displaced water. Every struggling cephalopod disturbed nearby currents. Those subtle disturbances likely reached specialized skin receptors inherited from crocodilian ancestors, providing another stream of sensory input before prey entered view. Vision remained important in the bright upper layers of the Tethys, yet the movement of water itself probably formed an equally valuable map, revealing nearby activity through shifting pulses that spread outward across the sea. For the larger geosaurines, hunting was likely an exercise in controlled pursuit. The muscular tail fluke generated rapid acceleration, while the paired flippers adjusted direction with precision during sudden turns. Once close enough, the broad jaws closed around struggling prey, and robust teeth anchored the grip while powerful neck muscles completed the attack. Such predators could seize sizable animals without relying on prolonged ambush, a strategy well suited to expansive marine habitats where encounters developed in open water instead of narrow channels. Far less certain is how these reptiles behaved around one another. No nesting grounds have been discovered, consistent with the growing evidence that reproduction occurred entirely at sea. Whether adults traveled alone, formed temporary associations, or maintained lasting family groups remains unknown. Fossils preserve skeletons with remarkable fidelity, yet behavior leaves only faint traces. The absence of evidence invites caution, allowing the bones to speak only where they truly can. Those bones also record encounters that did not always end peacefully. Some meteorhynchid remains preserve scars, interpreted as healed bite marks, while rare skin impressions have been suggested to contain traces that may represent barnacle attachment. Such details hint at lives extending across many seasons, long enough for wounds to heal and marine organisms to settle upon living skin. Even accomplished predators carried the marks of surviving within an active ecosystem. Each journey through those waters unfolded among other formidable hunters. Ichthyosaurs crossed deeper routes with effortless speed. Long-necked plesiosaurs searched nearby feeding grounds. Enormous pliosaurs patrolled farther below, capable of challenging almost anything they encountered. A meteorhynchid occupied its own carefully defined place within this layered community, pursuing prey while remaining alert to larger dangers. Another participant in one of the richest marine ecosystems Earth has ever sustained. Some chapters of Earth's history survive only as scattered fragments, leaving entire worlds to be reconstructed from isolated bones. Others endure through extraordinary accidents of geology that preserve far more than anyone might expect. The story of the marine crocodiles belongs to the second kind. Much of what can be understood about their bodies, their habits, and even the texture of their skin exists because one remarkable environment captured fleeting moments with astonishing precision. That place is the Solnhofen limestone of Bavaria, formed during the late Jurassic within a chain of shallow tropical lagoons separated from the open Tethys by low carbonate reefs. Fine carbonate mud settled through remarkably still water and accumulated layer upon delicate layer. Oxygen near the lagoon floor remained scarce, greatly reducing scavengers and slowing decay. Organisms that drifted or sank into these basins often rested undisturbed, allowing details that normally vanished within days to survive for millions of years. The Solnhofen deposits are celebrated for preserving Archaeopteryx, the celebrated early bird whose feathers transformed scientific understanding of avian origins. The same geological conditions that recorded those delicate feather impressions also preserved marine reptiles with exceptional fidelity. The thalattosuchians resting within these sediments retained outlines of soft tissues that would almost never survive elsewhere, offering rare glimpses beyond the skeleton itself. Among the most remarkable discoveries are impressions revealing the outer surface of metriorhynchid skin. Instead of large armored scales like those covering modern crocodiles, the preserved surface appears smooth and finely textured, marked by gentle folds and transverse fibers running across the body. Every feature points toward reduced drag while swimming through open water. The fossil record, therefore, preserves evidence that agrees with expectations drawn from fluid dynamics, allowing physical performance and preserved anatomy to support one another without relying on speculation. Some specimens reveal another gift from these ancient lagoons. Their stomach regions still contain traces of their final meals. Fossilized fish bones, fragments of cephalopods, and even cartilaginous remains from sharks provide direct evidence of diet. Such discoveries carry unusual scientific weight because they record actual feeding behavior rather than deductions based only upon tooth shape or jaw design. Each preserved meal strengthens the picture of specialized predators occupying distinct ecological roles within the Jurassic Sea. Another indispensable source of knowledge lies across what is now southern England. The Kimmeridge clay of Dorset represents a marine shale deposited during the late Jurassic beneath productive offshore waters. Although preserved differently from the Solnhofen limestone, it has yielded numerous thalattosuchian remains, including the largest known tooth attributed to Dacosaurus, discovered within the United Kingdom. Measuring approximately 5.5 centimeters, which is about 2.2 inches, the tooth reflects the formidable bite carried by one of the most specialized predators in the family. Together, these deposits accomplish something exceptionally rare. Animals that spent nearly their entire existence far from land seldom entered environments favorable for fossilization. Ocean currents, scavengers, and decomposition usually erased their remains before burial could occur. The sheltered lagoons of Bavaria and the marine sediments of Dorset interrupted that pattern. They preserved bodies, meals, skin, and anatomical detail with remarkable completeness, opening a window through which the transformation of sea crocodiles can still be studied with confidence after more than 150 million years. The history of the thalattosuchians was never written by a single lineage moving toward one inevitable destination. From the same ancestral roots, another branch followed a different course across the Jurassic world. Their story unfolded beside that of the metriorhynchids for tens of millions of years, sharing coastlines and shallow seas, while preserving a way of life that remained closely tied to the meeting place between land and water. Teleosauroids achieved remarkable success in their own right. Fossils reveal an extensive distribution across Europe, Africa, Asia, and parts of the ancient Americas. They occupied sheltered lagoons, coastal embayments, estuaries, brackish channels, and even some freshwater habitats. Such flexibility allowed different species to thrive under a wide variety of conditions. They cannot be viewed as evolutionary failures. For a long span of geological time, they flourished as one of the dominant crocodile lineages of the Mesozoic world. Within this branch, evolution explored directions very different from those taken by their fully marine relatives. Among the most distinctive were the macamosaurids, whose broad jaws carried blunt, rounded teeth designed for crushing instead of slicing. Heavy shells that resisted the bite of slender-toothed hunters became valuable food. Crustaceans, thick-shelled mollusks, and large ammonites could be cracked apart beneath enormous jaw pressure, opening a feeding strategy unavailable to predators equipped for pursuing swift fish through open water. The largest known representative, Macamosaurus rex, reached approximately 7 meters, which is about 23 feet in length. Its broad skull reflected immense crushing power rather than hydrodynamic speed. Fossils from what is now Tunisia indicate that this formidable reptile survived until approximately 130 million years ago, making it one of the youngest known teleosauroids. It remained an impressive predator, commanding coastal ecosystems through strength instead of pursuit across the open sea. Even so, its body revealed a fundamentally different evolutionary commitment. Thick armor continued to protect the back. Limbs remained better suited for maneuvering in shallow environments than for prolonged pelagic travel. Freshwater and coastal habitats still formed part of the ecological picture for many teleosauroids. They retained an enduring relationship with shorelines, where rivers, tidal flats, and sheltered bays offered familiar opportunities unavailable in the deeper ocean. Metriorhynchids abandoned nearly all of those ancestral connections. Their skeletons grew lighter, their tails became more efficient propellers, and their physiology adapted to permanent marine existence. Teleosauroids preserved a broader ecological range, balancing marine and nearshore lifestyles instead of committing entirely to either one. Each strategy proved successful for millions of years because each solved different ecological challenges presented by the Jurassic world. Eventually, changing oceans brought an end to both experiments. Teleosauroids disappeared during the early Cretaceous, around the same broad interval that witnessed the decline of the Metriorhynchids. Neither cautious flexibility nor complete specialization guaranteed survival as climates shifted, coastlines transformed, and marine ecosystems entered new phases of evolution. Their shared extinction reminds us that natural selection rewards adaptation only within the conditions of a particular age. Yet their legacies remain profoundly different. One lineage demonstrated how far a crocodile relative could travel while preserving much of its ancestral design. The other rewrote nearly every aspect of its biology until it scarcely resembled the creatures from which it descended. Together, they reveal evolution not as a ladder leading toward one destination, but as branching pathways, each shaped by opportunity, each remarkable in its own time. The closing chapter of the thalattosuchians does not begin with a dramatic battlefield or a final gathering of giants. It begins with something far smaller, a single fossil tooth resting within rocks laid down during the Aptian age of what is now Sicily. Around 125 million years ago, this isolated tooth crown marks the youngest known evidence of a lineage that had crossed seas, reshaped its own anatomy, and occupied the open ocean for about 65 million years. After such an immense history, the final trace appears almost modest, a fragment carrying the weight of an entire dynasty. Its solitude gives the fossil unusual significance. Earlier chapters of their history are represented by skeletons, skulls, impressions of skin, stomach contents, and complete bodies preserved with astonishing care. The ending offers no such abundance. No companion skeleton rests beside the tooth. No collection of bones reveals the final population, and no ancient shoreline records the last living community. One crown of enamel and dentine stands as the latest confirmed reminder that these remarkable marine crocodile relatives still moved through the seas while the early Cretaceous world continued to change around them. Their disappearance also formed part of a much broader transformation unfolding beneath the waves. Marine ecosystems were entering a prolonged period of ecological reorganization. Thalattosuchians were not alone in fading from the fossil record. Several familiar apex predators that had shaped Jurassic oceans for countless generations were also disappearing. Many ichthyosaur lineages vanished during roughly the same span of geological time, and the great pliosaurs likewise declined. The balance that had endured across earlier oceans gradually shifted as long established communities gave way to new ecological arrangements. No single catastrophe explains this transition with complete confidence. Evidence instead points toward a drawn out reduction in diversity extending through much of the early Cretaceous. Species became fewer, geographic ranges contracted, and the once widespread thalattosuchians occupied a shrinking portion of the marine world. Environmental change, altered coastlines, evolving food webs, and competition from emerging predators may each have contributed in different ways. The available fossils suggest a gradual retreat unfolding across many generations instead of a sudden collapse within a brief interval. As older rulers diminished, other marine reptiles expanded into the opportunities left behind. Mosasaurs, enormous relatives of modern monitor lizards, would eventually become dominant hunters across many seas during the middle part of the Cretaceous. New lineages of plesiosaurs also diversified, filling ecological roles that earlier groups had once occupied. The ocean remained rich with predators, although its leading inhabitants no longer belonged to the crocodile descendants that had mastered open water through extraordinary evolutionary change. Even this ending remains open to revision. Paleontology advances through discovery, and each new fossil has the potential to redraw familiar timelines. Recent finds from regions closer to the ancient equator have already extended the known history of thalattosuchians farther into the Cretaceous than earlier researchers expected. Another isolated tooth, a partial skeleton, or a well preserved skull could one day reveal that the final survivors endured beyond the presently accepted record. The final age of 125 million years may itself be revised as additional discoveries emerge from rocks that have yet to reveal their contents. For now, the Sicilian tooth remains the last confirmed page in their history. It represents neither failure nor an incomplete experiment. Across roughly 65 million years, these animals transformed from armored shoreline crocodile relatives into streamlined ocean specialists with flippers, tail flukes, salt processing glands, reshaped brains, lighter skeletons, and hunting strategies unlike any crocodilian alive today. Their story stretched across oceans and continents, leaving behind one of the longest and most successful records of marine adaptation achieved by any group of vertebrates. The final tooth does not diminish that achievement. It endures as the last surviving signature of a dynasty that once belonged to the sea. A history stretching across roughly 65 million years invites an equally grand explanation for its conclusion. It would be satisfying if one discovery, one layer of rock, or one unmistakable fossil revealed exactly why the thalattosuchians disappeared. The evidence offers no such certainty. Their extinction remains one of the enduring debates in marine paleontology. Several explanations fit parts of the record, yet none account for every observation. The final answer still rests somewhere beyond the fossils currently known. One possibility begins with the changing character of the oceans themselves. During the early Cretaceous, global climate and ocean circulation were undergoing significant transformation. Warm marine corridors shifted, sea levels changed, and regional temperatures fluctuated across different basins. Meteorhinkids appear to have been strongly associated with tropical and subtropical waters throughout much of their history. As cold-blooded reptiles, their physiology likely depended upon consistently warm seas to maintain efficient movement, digestion, and reproduction. Even modest changes in long-term ocean temperatures may have narrowed the environments where they could thrive, steadily reducing the territory available to successive generations. Another hypothesis focuses on the animals they pursued. Marine ecosystems never remained fixed for millions of years, and fish communities evolved alongside changing oceans. During the early Cretaceous, teleost fishes, the extraordinarily successful group that dominates modern seas, continued expanding in diversity and abundance. Earlier prey species declined or disappeared in many regions. A hunter perfected for one community of prey may struggle when those familiar targets become scarce or are replaced by swifter, more agile descendants. The fossil record cannot yet reveal whether food shortages alone drove their decline, although changing prey remains an important part of the discussion. Competition presents another possibility, though it is equally difficult to measure with certainty. As thalattosuchian diversity decreased, new marine predators were appearing and spreading into comparable ecological roles. Mosasaurs would eventually become dominant hunters, while several plesiosaur lineages continued diversifying. Whether these animals directly displaced thalattosuchians or merely prospered under the same environmental conditions that weakened older groups remains unresolved. The overlap in timing encourages comparison, but coincidence and causation are not always the same story within deep time. Some researchers suggest the answer may lie within the remarkable adaptations that once guaranteed their success. Every evolutionary advantage carries a hidden cost. The streamlined body, reduced armor, dependence on warm oceans, specialized salt processing glands, live birth, and complete commitment to pelagic life created superb hunters for Jurassic seas. Those same characteristics may also have reduced their flexibility when environmental conditions changed. A lineage highly refined for one world can struggle when that world begins to disappear around it. Recent studies examining marine predator turnover during the middle part of the Cretaceous support the view that the disappearance of thalattosuchians, ichthyosaurs, and pliosaurs formed part of one of the greatest reorganizations in marine ecosystems across the age of dinosaurs. Researchers continue investigating the roles of climate instability, changing oceans, evolving prey communities, and biological competition, yet no single mechanism has emerged as the definitive cause. Perhaps that uncertainty carries its own value. These animals became so completely adapted to a particular way of life that untangling which environmental thread finally unraveled their history has proven extraordinarily difficult. Their fossils preserve an exceptional evolutionary journey, while their disappearance remains an open scientific conversation, inviting each new discovery to refine the story a little further. The longer the journey of the thalattosuchians is followed, the more clearly a deeper pattern begins to emerge. Their disappearance was not merely the loss of another group of marine reptiles. It illustrates one of evolution's most enduring principles, a principle that appears again and again across the history of life. The very features that allow a lineage to flourish for millions of years can also narrow the paths available when the world begins to change. Success and vulnerability often grow from the same foundation. Biologists describe this condition as evolutionary overspecialization. An organism gradually becomes so precisely adapted to a particular environment, food source, or way of living that flexibility is steadily reduced. As long as those conditions remain stable, the specialization provides enormous advantages. Every generation becomes slightly more efficient than the last. Yet when climates shift, habitats disappear, or ecosystems reorganize, those same refinements may leave little room for adjustment. Natural selection shapes organisms for the challenges of the present. It has no ability to prepare them for circumstances that have not yet arrived. Modern animals offer familiar examples of this pattern. The giant panda belongs to a lineage descended from carnivorous ancestors, yet it now depends overwhelmingly upon bamboo, despite possessing a digestive system that still reflects its ancestry. Koalas rely on a narrow selection of eucalyptus leaves that few other mammals can tolerate. Numerous island species evolved without mammalian predators and flourished for thousands of years, only to decline rapidly after unfamiliar hunters reached their isolated homes. None of these species are poorly adapted. Each represents remarkable success within a particular ecological setting. The metriorhynchids followed the same evolutionary logic on an even greater scale. Their smooth skin reduced drag while swimming through open water. Their flippers guided swift turns that ordinary crocodilian limbs could never achieve. Their tail flukes supplied efficient propulsion across long distances, while live birth freed them from returning to shore to reproduce. Salt processing glands maintained the delicate balance of body chemistry far from fresh water. Every adaptation strengthened their place within the sea, yet every adaptation also closed another route back toward the shoreline their distant ancestors had once inhabited. Evolutionary research has uncovered no convincing example of a highly pelagic vertebrate lineage abandoning permanent ocean life and successfully returning to a fully terrestrial existence. Once bodies, physiology, reproduction, and sensory systems become completely integrated with marine existence, reversing that transformation appears extraordinarily unlikely. The journey from land into open water resembles a bridge crossed only once. Future evolution continues beyond it, although the path behind gradually disappears. Viewed through that perspective, the fate of the thalattosuchians reflects neither weakness nor failure. Evolution worked exactly as expected. It rewarded the traits that produced survival and reproduction within Jurassic oceans, refining them across countless generations until these reptiles became among the finest marine predators of their age. The process could not anticipate oceans that would circulate differently, prey communities that would reorganize, or climates that would favor new competitors. It could respond only after those changes had already begun. That realization lends their story an unusual depth. During the late Jurassic, no sign announced that their mastery contained the seeds of limitation. They occupied seas across much of the planet, hunted with extraordinary efficiency, and displayed anatomical innovations unmatched among crocodile relatives. Only from the distant vantage point of millions of years later does the hidden cost become visible. Their greatest achievements were inseparable from the commitments that ultimately confine their future, leaving behind one of evolution's clearest reminders that perfection is always measured against a world that never stands still. Viewed from the broadest perspective, the story of the thalattosuchians becomes part of something far larger than a single lineage of marine crocodile relatives. Across the immense span of Earth's history, the journey from land into the sea has unfolded many times, each beginning with a different terrestrial ancestor and ending with remarkably familiar solutions. More than 30 separate groups of four-limbed vertebrates have independently entered marine environments during roughly 300 million years of evolution. They were separated by ancestry, geography, and time, yet the ocean repeatedly guided them toward similar destinations. Among those travelers were ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, sea turtles, penguins, sea snakes, marine iguanas, whales, dolphins, seals, sea lions, and walruses. Their ancestors once walked across landscapes that differed greatly from one another. Some descended from reptiles, others from mammals, and still others from birds. Their starting points could hardly have been more different. Even so, life in open water presented the same physical challenges to every lineage that attempted the transition. This recurring pattern is known as convergent evolution. It describes the process through which unrelated organisms independently evolve similar features because they encounter comparable environmental pressures. The ocean provides one of the clearest demonstrations of this principle. Water is denser than air. Resistance shapes every movement, and buoyancy alters the way bodies function. Swimming efficiently, locating prey, regulating body chemistry, and reproducing away from land all impose demands that remain remarkably consistent across millions of years. Evolution repeatedly answers those demands with variations on the same biological themes. A streamlined body appears again and again, reducing resistance as animals move through the water. Limbs flatten into flippers that generate precise control while turning, climbing through the water column, or maintaining stability. Powerful tails become the primary engines of propulsion in several lineages, while salt processing glands evolve wherever long lives in sea water require careful regulation of internal chemistry. Live birth also emerges repeatedly, freeing fully marine animals from the need to return to land for reproduction. Each innovation arose independently, yet each addressed the same enduring problems presented by life far from shore. Among the most striking examples are dolphins and ichthyosaurs. One belongs to a mammalian lineage, while the other descended from reptiles. Their ancestors were separated by well over 50 million years of evolutionary history before either entered the sea. Nevertheless, both eventually developed elongated snouts, streamlined bodies, dorsal fins, and crescent-shaped tail flukes that produced efficient forward thrust. Their resemblance reflects neither close relationship nor shared ancestry. Instead, it reveals how strongly the physical realities of marine life influence evolutionary outcomes. The thalattosuchians occupy a distinctive place within this larger narrative. They represent the crocodilian expression of the same recurring process. Their flippers, smooth skin, tail flukes, salt glands, and reproductive adaptations emerged through their own evolutionary pathway, independent of whales, ichthyosaurs, or any other marine lineage. Fossils preserve enough intermediate forms to trace many of those transformations with unusual clarity, allowing scientists to follow changes unfolding across millions of years instead of seeing only their beginning and end. Taken together, these repeated journeys reveal something profound about the history of life. Evolution does not invent without limits. Faced with the enduring rules imposed by the sea, it often discovers comparable answers through entirely different lineages. The thalattosuchians were neither the first nor the last to follow that ancient path, yet they remain among its clearest and most beautifully documented chapters. Few gifts in paleontology are as valuable as continuity. More often than not, the fossil record resembles a scattered collection of surviving pages, each preserving only part of a much longer story. Entire chapters disappear beneath erosion, changing landscapes, or the simple chance that no remains were ever buried where they could endure. The history of the thalattosuchians stands apart because far more of that story survived than scientists would normally expect. Their fossils reveal an evolutionary passage unfolding across roughly 65 million years, allowing individual changes to be followed through successive forms instead of guessed from isolated discoveries. Many famous transitions from land to sea remain partly hidden. Early whales are represented by remarkable fossils such as Pakicetus, Ambulocetus, and Rhodocetus, each illuminating an important stage in the transformation from terrestrial mammals to fully marine animals. Even so, intervals remain where evidence is incomplete, and researchers continue searching for forms that bridge remaining gaps. The earliest phases of ichthyosaur evolution are less clearly documented, while the origin of sea turtles in marine environments is reconstructed from a record that preserves only fragments of the overall journey. The thalattosuchians present a different picture. Early teleosauroids still carried heavy armor, retained limbs suited for movement near shore, and occupied coastal, lagoonal, brackish, and even freshwater habitats. Basal members of the metriorhynchoid lineage reveal bodies already beginning to change as armor diminished and deeper marine environments became more important. Early members of the metriorhynchid family display further commitment to pelagic life, followed by increasingly specialized forms whose smooth skin, flippers, tail flukes, salt processing glands, and live birth completed the transformation. Later, generations eventually produced powerful predators adapted for permanent existence far from land. No fossil sequence is perfectly continuous. Evolution does not leave neatly ordered specimens waiting in uninterrupted layers of rock. Every lineage contains intervals where evidence is limited, and future discoveries will almost certainly refine parts of the picture. Even with those unavoidable limitations, the thalattosuchian record remains among the most complete examples of any marine transition known. Individual anatomical changes appear in a sequence that agrees closely with evolutionary relationships reconstructed from the skeletons themselves, allowing each stage to reinforce the next. Modern crocodilians provide another advantage unavailable for many extinct groups. Living species preserve the basic anatomical framework from which the marine lineage began. Their skulls, muscles, limbs, sensory organs, and physiology establish a practical baseline against which fossil species can be compared. Researchers can measure how each feature changed through time with unusual confidence. Such direct comparison is impossible for ichthyosaurs, which have no surviving descendants, and far more limited for the earliest whale ancestors. Research examining the inner ear, including studies published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, has emphasized this exceptional continuity. The combination of well-preserved fossils and well-resolved evolutionary relationships makes the thalattosuchians unique among marine reptiles as an example of a land-to-sea transition documented across multiple stages instead of isolated. Endpoints. What these fossils ultimately preserve extends beyond remarkable skeletons. They allow evolution itself to be observed in motion, each generation adding another measurable step until a shoreline crocodile lineage became one of the most specialized marine predators the Jurassic world would ever know. The story comes home in an unexpected place, along the edge of a modern river where a crocodile rests with scarcely a ripple around its body. Its posture appears timeless, its broad head lifted above the water, its armored back catching the warmth of the day. At first glance, it seems to embody permanence itself, a creature that has changed very little across immense stretches of geological time. That impression carries an important measure of truth, yet it conceals an evolutionary history far richer than its familiar outline suggests. Modern crocodiles are often described as living fossils, survivors whose design proved so effective that evolution scarcely altered it. Their ancestors endured mass extinctions, continental rearrangements, and changing climates while retaining the body plan recognized today. Such endurance deserves admiration, although the phrase can unintentionally erase the remarkable diversity that once flourished within the broader crocodile lineage. Survival did not belong to a single unchanging form. It emerged from a family tree filled with experiments that explored environments extending far beyond rivers and wetlands. Nothing about the appearance of a living crocodile hints that some of its distant relatives abandoned heavy armor, reshaped their limbs into flippers, developed crescent shaped tail flukes, processed seawater with specialized salt glands, and gave birth to fully developed young in the open ocean. Those marine descendants crossed warm Jurassic seas beside ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and giant pliosaurs, occupying ecological roles almost impossible to imagine while watching a crocodile drift beside reeds or mangrove roots today. Their existence survives through fossils rather than living descendants, leaving modern species to carry only the distant inheritance of that forgotten branch. The crocodilomorph family was never a single, uninterrupted line leading toward the present. It spread outward into an extraordinary radiation containing countless forms adapted to different ways of life. Some species sprinted across land with long limbs. Others fed on plants, shellfish, fish, or large vertebrates. A few entered the open sea so completely that returning to land ceased to be part of their lives. Most of those experiments eventually disappeared, leaving only one surviving pathway to continue into the modern world. The crocodiles alive today belong to that enduring branch. Their anatomy remained flexible enough to exploit rivers, estuaries, lakes, swamps, and coastal margins without becoming dependent upon a single specialized habitat. Such versatility proved invaluable as marine ecosystems changed during the early Cretaceous. While fully pelagic relatives declined, the more generalized crocodilian line retained options. Its members could shift between fresh and salt water, occupy varied environments, and persist through ecological changes that proved far more difficult for specialized ocean hunters. There is a reflective quality in that outcome. The lineage that transformed most completely into life at sea produced one of evolution's most astonishing marine predators, yet it vanished without leaving descendants. The branch that remained closer to its ancestral condition continued onward, eventually reaching the rivers and wetlands of the modern world. Every crocodile basking along a shoreline, therefore, carries an inheritance that extends beyond its own appearance. Hidden within its family history is the memory of relatives that once crossed open oceans with flippers instead of walking limbs and tail flukes instead of armored tails. They are absent from the living world, yet their fossils reveal how far the crocodile lineage once traveled when the sea invited an entirely different future. The story now widens beyond any single lineage because the sea itself deserves attention as an active participant in evolution. Oceans do far more than provide space for life to exist. They shape bodies, behaviors, and destinies through physical laws that remain consistent across millions of years. Every creature entering marine waters encounters the same challenges, regardless of whether its ancestors once walked through forests, crossed deserts, or rested beside freshwater streams. Water changes nearly every aspect of movement and survival, Buoyancy reduces the burden of gravity, while drag resists every stroke and turn. Pressure increases with depth, compressing bodies that descend into darker layers. Salt constantly draws water from tissues, demanding specialized methods for maintaining internal balance. Temperature spreads through water differently than through air, influencing metabolism and the distribution of species. Navigation also becomes a three-dimensional task, with food, danger, and opportunity existing above, below, and in every surrounding direction. These conditions are not optional. Every lineage entering the ocean must answer them in some way. Such demands explain why unrelated animals repeatedly arrive at remarkably similar solutions. Convergent evolution is not a coincidence produced by imagination. It emerges because the sea rewards certain designs while placing severe limits on countless alternatives. A streamlined body reduces resistance. Limbs transformed into flippers generate efficient propulsion. Powerful tails create sustained forward motion. Salt glands appear wherever excess salt must be expelled. Similar reproductive strategies emerge when returning to land becomes increasingly impractical. Evolution does not copy earlier organisms, yet identical challenges often produce familiar outcomes. That shared pattern explains why ichthyosaurs eventually resembled dolphins, despite descending from entirely different ancestors, separated by immense spans of evolutionary history. It explains why meteorrhynchids acquired body proportions recalling those of ichthyosaurs despite belonging to the crocodile lineage. Seals, sea lions, and fur seals likewise evolved flippered limbs suited for aquatic travel, even though each followed its own evolutionary path. Different beginnings gradually converged because the surrounding environment favored particular answers again and again. Among all ancient seas, the Tethys Ocean offered especially fertile conditions for innovation. Throughout much of the Jurassic, broad expanses of warm, productive water stretched between continents, supporting flourishing ecosystems across enormous distances. Abundant marine life created opportunities for specialists occupying every level of the food web. Competition encouraged refinement instead of uniformity. Predators explored new hunting methods, while prey evolved equally diverse defenses. Each ecological opportunity invited another experiment, adding further complexity to an already thriving marine world. From those waters emerged some of the most extraordinary vertebrates ever known. Certain ichthyosaurs developed bodies capable of descending to remarkable depths in pursuit of prey. Giant pliosaurs carried skulls reaching 2 meters, which is about 656 feet, in length, equipped with immense jaws built for overpowering large animals. Thalattosuchians completed one of the most comprehensive transitions from land to sea ever documented, abandoning terrestrial life until little remained of their distant ancestors, except the deeper history written within their bones. The Tethys Ocean itself eventually disappeared as continents continued their long movements across Earth's surface. Its waters were gradually transformed into younger seas, including the Mediterranean and parts of the Indian Ocean. Although that ancient ocean no longer exists in its former form, its influence remains preserved in stone. Across tens of millions of years, it became an evolutionary engine that repeatedly challenged life to invent new possibilities, leaving behind one of the richest records of marine innovation the planet has ever known. At its widest scale, this journey reaches beyond a single family of marine reptiles and settles upon a recurring theme written throughout Earth's history. The thalattosuchians are one expression of that theme, preserved with uncommon clarity. Their transformation belongs to a much older conversation between life and the environments it enters. A conversation repeated across hundreds of millions of years as new opportunities emerge and familiar challenges return in different forms. The question appears whenever coastlines expand, ecological space opens, and competition reshapes familiar landscapes. An animal already suited for hunting near water gradually encounters resources beyond the shore. Generation after generation, small variations accumulate. Individuals better suited to swimming travel farther. Those able to feed more efficiently in marine habitats leave more descendants. Features once useful only for brief excursions become permanent characteristics. Eventually, the shoreline no longer marks a destination. It becomes a distant memory carried only in ancestry. Across roughly 300 million years of vertebrate evolution, the fossil record reveals this sequence again and again. Distinct groups, separated by ancestry and immense stretches of time, repeatedly entered the sea. Each lineage began with different bodies and inherited different limitations, yet the ocean responded with remarkably similar demands. Those capable of answering them flourished. Those unable to adapt remained tied to older ways of life. The process unfolded independently so many times that repetition itself became one of the strongest pieces of evidence available to evolutionary science. Mutation operates without foresight, producing variation through countless unpredictable changes. Natural selection, however, does not reward possibilities equally. Similar environments repeatedly favor similar solutions because the underlying physical challenges remain constant. Fast movement through seawater favors streamlined bodies. Efficient propulsion rewards specialized tails and flippered limbs. Marine hunting encourages sensory systems capable of functioning across broad expanses of open water. These recurring outcomes emerge without planning, arising instead from the persistent influence of the same environmental pressures acting upon different evolutionary starting points. One of the deepest insights offered by paleontology rests within that consistency. Given comparable ecological circumstances, life often discovers comparable answers. This observation does not suggest direction or predetermined purpose. It reflects the practical reality that the number of effective designs for an active, pelagic predator living in saltwater is more limited than imagination alone might suggest. Evolution explores many possibilities, yet successful forms repeatedly converge because the ocean continually evaluates every experiment according to the same enduring rules. The thalattosuchians preserve one of the clearest examples of this enduring pattern. Their history records a progression from armored coastal hunters to streamlined specialists living entirely at sea. Intermediate forms reveal each major stage with unusual completeness, allowing scientists to follow anatomical change across approximately 65 million years. Few evolutionary transitions are documented with comparable continuity, making this lineage especially valuable for understanding how dramatic biological transformations unfold through accumulated changes rather than sudden leaps. Seen from that broader perspective, their history becomes more than the biography of an extinct crocodile relative. It becomes evidence that order can emerge from countless independent events acting across immense spans of time. Stone preserves each chapter separately, yet together they reveal a larger narrative. The ocean keeps presenting familiar challenges, life keeps exploring possible responses, and evolution continues, composing remarkably similar stories in voices that belong to entirely different families of animals. Viewed across the immense span of geological time, the history of the thalattosuchians becomes more than an account of anatomy or extinction. It settles into a reflection upon commitment, revealing how every lasting transformation carries consequences that extend far beyond the generation in which it first appeared. Evolution records those consequences with unwavering honesty, preserving both extraordinary success and eventual disappearance within the same continuous story. Irreversibility is one of evolution's defining characteristics. Small changes accumulate across countless generations until an organism becomes profoundly different from its distant ancestors. Once the meteorrhynchids shed their heavy armor, reshaped their limbs into flippers, refined their tails for continuous swimming, and altered their pelvis to support live birth in open water, there was no biological pathway waiting to restore the older condition. Natural selection modifies what already exists. It does not preserve forgotten versions for future use. Every successful adaptation closes certain possibilities while opening others. Because of that process, every individual meteorrhynchid entered a world already chosen by ancestors it would never know. None experienced a shoreline as home. None returned to lay eggs upon land. The open sea was not a destination reached through exploration. It was the complete setting of life, from birth until death. Millions of years of accumulated evolutionary change became the ordinary reality of each generation, shaping instincts, anatomy, and behavior so completely that alternatives no longer existed. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout the history of life. A lineage gradually commits itself to a particular environment until its entire existence depends upon conditions remaining broadly favorable. Such commitment often produces remarkable success. Specialists commonly outperform generalists within the habitats to which they are exquisitely adapted. Resources are used more efficiently, competition is reduced, and opportunities inaccessible to less specialized relatives become available. Evolution rewards these advantages because it always acts within the present rather than anticipating distant futures. Many familiar marine animals illustrate the enduring success of that strategy. Whales completed their own return to the sea and continue to occupy oceans across the globe. Dolphins diversified into numerous species while mastering a wide range of marine habitats. Seals also flourished after adapting their limbs for efficient swimming without abandoning every connection to land. Sea turtles have crossed vast oceans for approximately 100 million years, carrying an ancient marine heritage into the modern world through changing climates and shifting continents. Other lineages followed equally committed paths, yet encountered environments that no longer favored the specializations that once ensured prosperity. Ichthyosaurs disappeared after dominating marine ecosystems for millions of years. Plesiosaurs also vanished despite their remarkable diversity and success. The thalattosuchians joined them as changing oceans reshaped ecological opportunities. Their anatomy remained superbly suited to the world in which it evolved, even as that world gradually transformed around them. From this perspective, commitment cannot be judged as wisdom or error. It is the inevitable consequence of adaptation carried far enough to achieve excellence. Vulnerability emerges from the very same process, revealed only after circumstances shift beyond the limits of flexibility. During the late Jurassic, the meteorrhynchids embodied one of evolution's greatest marine achievements. By the early Cretaceous, they had become another chapter in Earth's long history of changing worlds. The animals remained fundamentally the same. It was the planet that continued moving forward. Across every age of Earth's history, the ocean has behaved less like a destination than a force that reshapes whatever enters it. Continents drift, climates fluctuate, and coastlines migrate. Yet the sea continues presenting the same demands to every newcomer. Those demands are written into buoyancy, salt, pressure, currents and the resistance of moving water. Any lineage that remains long enough begins responding to them, generation after generation, until the descendants bear only a distant resemblance to the ancestors that first crossed the shoreline. This transformation reaches far beyond outward appearance. Limbs become flippers or disappear altogether. Dense skeletons lighten or strengthen according to new mechanical needs. Skin changes as water replaces air as the surrounding medium. Salt balance becomes an unending physiological negotiation. Reproduction adapts to an environment where returning to land may no longer be practical or even possible. Piece by piece, an organism acquires traits that fit the sea so completely that its former identity survives only in the deep record of ancestry. Evolution does not erase history, yet it layers new history upon it until the older chapter can scarcely be recognized. The ocean has repeated this work many times, using remarkably different starting points. Reptiles, mammals, birds, and other vertebrate groups approach the shoreline carrying distinct bodies inherited from separate evolutionary paths. Once immersed in the same physical world, those differences gradually narrowed. Streamlined forms reduced drag. Smooth surfaces eased movement through water. Powerful tails, or broad flippers, generated efficient propulsion. Mechanisms for handling excess salt appeared in unrelated groups because every marine existence required similar solutions. The sea became both architect and examiner, rewarding designs that satisfied its enduring conditions. Seen from this wider perspective, the extraordinary variety of life is balanced by equally powerful constraints. Evolution explores countless possibilities through random mutation, yet natural selection filters those possibilities through the realities of physics. Water resists motion in predictable ways. Gravity is moderated by buoyancy. Food must be found across three-dimensional habitats instead of broad terrestrial landscapes. The number of successful answers is larger than it first appears, though it remains far smaller than imagination alone might suggest. Similar environments repeatedly encourage similar body plans because the underlying problems never truly disappear. The thalattosuchians reveal this process with unusual clarity. Their distant ancestors stepped into coastal waters carrying unmistakably crocodilian features. Across millions of years, those inherited characteristics yielded to adaptations that served an entirely different existence. Their descendants became swift marine predators whose bodies belonged to open seas instead of riverbanks. They completed a transformation so thorough that no human eyes would ever witness them alive. By the time our own species emerged, their world had long since dissolved into stone, sediment, and memory preserved beneath layers of earth. What remains extends beyond fossilized bones, remarkable skulls, or beautifully preserved skeletons. Their deeper legacy is an enduring recognition that environments shape life with astonishing persistence. The ocean continues this work today, just as it did hundreds of millions of years ago, steadily refining every lineage that commits itself to its waters. Given sufficient time, the sea has always proven capable of producing forms that once seemed unimaginable until they become another natural expression of the world it has patiently sculpted. A single tooth rests within stone from Sicily, dating to the Aptian stage of the early Cretaceous, around 125 million years ago. It is modest beside the immense story it represents, yet its importance is difficult to overstate. That isolated fossil marks the final known trace of a marine crocodilian dynasty that endured for roughly 65 million years. After countless generations crossing warm seas, pursuing prey, raising young, and shaping entire marine ecosystems, one surviving tooth became the last unmistakable signature of their existence preserved in the geological record. Nothing about the animals themselves suggested such an ending. Like every living creature that has ever occupied the earth, they experienced only the present. The warm waters of the Jurassic stretched outward as though they would never disappear. Familiar coastlines, abundant prey, and established migration routes formed the complete reality of their lives. They could not perceive continental movement measured across millions of years, nor the gradual changes in climate and ocean circulation that were already redirecting the future of their world. As sediments accumulated across the floor of the Tethys Ocean, they performed a task no living organism intended. Fine particles settled around skeletons, skin, and scattered remains, enclosing fleeting moments inside layers of mineral grains. Those deposits became records rather than memories. Each fossil preserved an instant that neither paused nor announced its significance. Long before the final disappearance of the thalattosuchians, the rocks had already begun collecting the evidence that would one day reveal both their triumph and their loss. Among the most celebrated of these archives stands the Solnhofen limestone of Bavaria. The same exceptionally fine sediments that captured delicate impressions of meteor-hinked skin also preserved the remarkable remains of Archaeopteryx, recording marine reptiles and the earliest known bird within the same extraordinary landscape. Their fossils share pages of Earth's history without ever meeting in life again. Quarry walls now expose scenes that unfolded during a vanished sea, allowing distant worlds to emerge from stone with astonishing clarity. What has endured is neither the dynasty nor the ocean that shaped it. Enduring instead is the evidence. Teeth reveal feeding strategies. Bones preserve the architecture of powerful swimmers. Skin impressions confirm adaptations that transformed crocodilian ancestors into fully marine predators. Modern computed tomography scans uncover hidden structures, including the enlarged salt glands that once regulated seawater chemistry in living animals. Every discovery adds another carefully tested sentence to a narrative assembled from physical remains instead of memory. The story itself, therefore, remains unfinished. Each newly examined fossil, each refined evolutionary analysis, and each fresh discovery extends our understanding without altering the lives already lived. Today's oceans are inhabited by whales, dolphins, sea turtles, seals, and many other descendants of lineages that also embraced marine existence. They continue an evolutionary tradition that stretches deep into geological time, demonstrating that the sea still reshapes those that commit themselves to it. At this very moment, across waters covering about 70% of Earth's surface, new generations are adapting to familiar challenges of salt, pressure, movement, and survival. The thalattosuchians have vanished, yet the process that transformed them continues without interruption. Their bodies became fossils, their ocean disappeared, and their lineage came to an end. The stone endured, the evidence endured, and through that evidence, their place in Earth's history endures as well.